March 19, 2016, 8:21 a.m. Surveillance footage captures 16-year-old Paige Doherty, looking all neat and put together, backpack over her shoulders, pushing open the glass door of a small store on a busy street in Clydebank. She steps inside, and the door slowly shuts behind her. And, well, that's the last time anyone ever sees her. It was just a typical Saturday morning. You know, no panic, no unusual activity. But from that moment, a story began to unfold. One that would send shockwaves through not only her family and friends, but the entire community. I mean, it's a story where the familiar turned into something chilling. A cozy local store, a friendly owner, a street everyone knew, it all became a doorway into darkness. Within hours, Paige's family started to realize that something was really not right. Paige Doherty was born on April 17, 2000, in the Scottish town of Clydebank. From a young age, she really stood out for her kind heart and almost unusual maturity. She was smiling, thoughtful, approachable. She just got along easily with people of all ages. Paige wasn't really one to seek attention, but her presence was always felt. Know what I mean? She was the oldest of four, and that sense of responsibility, it just came naturally to her, especially when it came to her siblings. Her mother, Pamela, raised the family with her husband, Andy, who was Paige's stepfather. And their home was always full of life. And look, while they definitely faced their share of struggles, there was this deep bond between everyone, just genuine care and closeness. Paige had a really special place in her heart for her younger brother and sisters. I mean, she didn't just look after them, she truly cared. From a young age, she'd help out around the house and wasn't afraid to speak up when, serious stuff came up. She was especially close to her younger brother, Andrew, who had some developmental needs. Paige would often take him to the park or to the movies, and those moments weren't just important to him. They meant a whole lot to her too. From pretty early on, Paige knew what she wanted to do with her life. She dreamed of becoming a hairstylist and a beauty expert. She was just always drawn to the world of fashion and personal style. She loved doing makeup and hair, experimenting with different looks, and staying up to date with all the trends. Before we get into today's case, drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? What time is it? And what's the weather like over there? Also, what case should I do next? Let me know down below. I read all of them. And hit that subscribe button. Let's begin. So by 16, she was focused and really clear on her goals. When she got the chance to work Saturdays at a local salon, she took it dead serious. It wasn't just a side job for her. It was the beginning of her future. Her coworkers said she was always punctual, respectful, and just so eager to learn. Paige also had a pretty vibrant social life. Her social media was full of pictures with her friends and these cheerful little clips where she'd be laughing, joking, and showing off her beauty skills. She had a lot of acquaintances, but her absolute closest friend was Lauren. They spent a lot of time together. Sleepovers, heart-to-hearts, sharing secrets, and dreaming about the future. Another key person in Paige's life was her boyfriend, Dylan. Their relationship was young, sure, but it was real, filled with care and warmth. They texted often, called each other every single day, and talked about pretty much everything. Paige really trusted him. He knew what was going on in her life, and from what everyone who knew them said, he seriously cared about her. Being apart, even for just one day, was hard for both of them. Paige's life was simple, yeah, but it had real meaning. She'd often tell those closest to her that she had big dreams, but she never actually planned on leaving her hometown. Her vision of success wasn't about escaping. It was about building a life right there, in the place where she grew up. Her actions just reflected this real sense of purpose. She worked, she studied, she helped others, and she showed that she cared. Not because she had to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. All right, so, at first glance, John Letham seemed like a typical member of the stable and, respected middle class in the Clydebank community. At 32 years old, he was a local business owner, married, and raising a young daughter. His wife, Kasia, was originally from Poland, and from the outside, their life looked quiet and comfortable. A modest home near his workplace, a steady routine, caring for their daughter, going for walks. It all gave off this image of reliability. John was pretty well known in the neighborhood, and he maintained this image of a polite and composed man. He ran a small storefront called Delicious Deli. It was a combination of a corner store, a mini cafe, and a deli counter. It sat on a busy street, not too far from residential areas and a bus stop. So you had locals, students, and workers from the nearby streets all coming in pretty frequently. John often worked the counter himself, chatting with customers, a lot of whom he knew by face. His whole demeanor was friendly. He rarely showed any irritation, and he never, ever outwardly acted in a disrespectful way. People who stopped by his shop regularly didn't notice anything off. He came across as quiet, neat, maybe a little reserved, but nothing that raised any real concern. His business reputation was solid. The store was clean, it was well stocked, and it was consistently open. Seriously, no one had anything bad to say about the guy. And he wasn't linked to any drama or controversy. At least, not until March of 2016. But behind that image of a dependable family man, there were some facts that most people just did not know. Here's the thing. John had a twin brother named George Letham. Their relationship wasn't widely known, and unlike John, George had a criminal past. Back in 2003, when he was just 19, George was convicted of a really serious offense. Dear Lord. He ambushed a woman, dragged her into the bushes, and carried out an assault with intent. He got a 3-year suspended sentence, was ordered to complete community service, and was placed on the offender registry. Years went by, but George's behavior did not improve. In 2016, just days before a court hearing, he was involved in another incident. He showed up drunk near a gas station, armed with a knife and metal batons, and just started shouting threats at people walking by. Jesus Christ. Soon after that, he was back in custody. His life just remained chaotic and dangerous. Then, in 2019, he committed another assault. This time at home, targeting his pregnant wife. While he was under the influence, he physically attacked her, causing serious injuries. God damn. He was later sentenced to 9 months in prison. John, on the other hand, had never been charged with any crimes. Not one. His record was clean. No complaints, no police reports, just nothing in the system. And that's what allowed him to maintain this flawless public image for years. But as investigators started to unravel this case, a very different picture began to emerge. Not of a calm and reliable businessman, but of someone capable of sudden, just, uncontrollable aggression. The Letham family found itself right under the microscope of public scrutiny, but unlike his brother George, John had managed to keep up the appearance of a normal life, for a while, anyway. His wife Kasia said she never noticed anything that seemed alarming or out of place. So, that image of the family man and shop owner, it turned out to be just that, an image. The Letham family history was complex, tangled, and, frankly, unsettling. But very few people knew the full story, and it was this exact contrast between a calm exterior and a hidden tension that ultimately led to a tragedy that shook all of Clydebank. So, on the evening of March 18th, 2016, Paige Doherty was staying over at her best friend Lauren's house. It was a typical sleepover, something they did all the time. The two girls would spend those nights talking about life, sharing personal stories, trying out new makeup looks, experimenting with different hairstyles. Even at her age, Paige was already super organized. She knew she had to be at work early the next morning, so she set her alarm ahead of time to make sure she got up and didn't miss her bus. The next morning, March 19th, Paige got up just like she planned, no fuss at all. She got dressed, said goodbye to Lauren, and left to walk to the bus stop. It was her usual Saturday routine. She started walking the familiar route. Normally, she'd stop at the same store every time. The owner, Ashi Ahmed, had known Paige since she was just a little girl. She'd often pop in to grab a sandwich or a drink before work. But on this day, something changed. As she passed Ashi's shop, she just waved at him without going inside and kept walking down the street. Just a few yards away from that usual spot was John Letham's store. And that morning, for whatever reason, Paige chose to stop there instead. At exactly 8:21 a.m., surveillance cameras recorded Paige approaching the deli and stepping inside. And that was the last time anyone saw her. From that moment on, she just completely disappeared from everyone's view. So when Paige didn't show up at the salon for her shift, alarm bells went off immediately. Her coworkers knew she took her job seriously. I mean, she never ran late or missed a shift without calling. Her phone was turned off. The team at the salon tried calling her, but they couldn't get through. So they contacted her mother, Pamela, to let her know. And that worry, it quickly turned into fear. Pamela couldn't reach her either, which was completely out of character for Paige. She always replied to texts and calls, especially from the people closest to her. At the same time, her boyfriend Dylan was also trying to get a hold of her. None of his messages had been read. Growing more and more concerned, he called the salon to check if she'd made it in. When he found out that Paige hadn't shown up and that no one had heard from her, his concern just turned into pure panic. So Dylan and Pamela both started checking Paige's social media accounts. She was always active online, posting updates, replying to friends, sharing photos. But that day, there was just nothing. No updates, no posts, no replies. The silence online only made their fear worse. This wasn't just unusual for her, it was completely unheard of. Hours went by, and still no word. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just a case of her running late or some minor misunderstanding. Her family and friends, they knew by then that something serious had happened. Pamela contacted law enforcement right away. Given the circumstances and everything they knew about Paige, the authorities treated the situation as a high-risk disappearance right from the start. I mean, unlike in a lot of teen cases, the idea that she might have run away wasn't even on the table. The first phase of the search began. Family, friends, salon co-workers, and even neighbors joined the efforts, calling everyone they knew, printing up flyers, looking for any possible clue. But at this point, not a single lead came through. It's like Paige had just vanished in a matter of minutes. And nobody could have known that a simple decision to stop by a corner deli would turn out to be so, life-altering. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked in parallel, conducting interviews. They mapped out Paige's likely path from Lauren's house to the bus stop and tried to determine who might have seen her that morning. Shop owners along the way were questioned, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses was being reviewed. Any little deviation from her usual route drew attention. The day passed, but there was still no new information. The lack of witnesses, signs, or physical evidence only made the situation more tense. The only solid window investigators had was that very brief period when Paige was walking down the street and entered one of the stores. And that's when attention started shifting toward the businesses along her path. No one suspected yet that the trail had gone cold right behind one of those very doors. The search for Paige Doherty went on for 2 full days. Her family, volunteers, and the police, they never gave up hope of finding her alive. But on the morning of March 21st, 2016, that hope was just shattered. Her body was discovered by 2 people who were out walking along an overgrown roadside area, about a mile from the bus stop she'd been heading toward that Saturday morning. The location itself was pretty remote. It was clear the girl had died from multiple knife wounds, and later findings would reveal just how unbelievably brutal the attack had been. Forensic examiners counted 146 sharp force injuries on Paige's body. Oh my God. 61 of those were direct stab wounds. The rest were consistent with defensive injuries, sustained while she was fighting back. Her arms and her forearms showed the heaviest damage, which was proof that Paige fought back with everything she had. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she fought for her life. One deep slash to her neck had severed the carotid artery, causing massive bleeding, and according to the experts, that was the fatal wound. The level of sheer aggression involved in this crime left no doubt in anyone's mind. This wasn't a random act or a robbery gone wrong. This was deeply personal and emotionally charged. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a random attacker. The number of wounds, the specific areas targeted, and the sheer force used all pointed to someone who knew Paige. The crime was committed with a kind of rage, something you often see in cases driven by personal motives. The location where her body was found also raised a lot of red flags. It was hidden from the main road, not visible from traffic, and it would have taken some real effort to get to. This wasn't some last-minute decision. Whoever was responsible either knew the area well, or they'd picked the spot ahead of time to hide what they'd done. The way the body had been wrapped and how it was placed made it clear she had been brought there after she was already dead. The news about the discovery of Paige's body spread like wildfire across Clydebank. For everyone involved in the search, it was a devastating shock. The family was notified officially. Her mother, Pamela, she struggled to accept the reality of it. And Dylan, her boyfriend, was in complete and total disbelief. The volunteers who had been posting flyers and sharing updates online were now posting messages of grief and sympathy. The entire community just sank into this collective state of mourning. Meanwhile, police began analyzing surveillance footage and speaking to anyone who might have seen Paige the day she disappeared. Their goal was to reconstruct her final steps and figure out who saw her last. It became clear that this crime had either been planned or carried out by someone who was sure they could erase all traces. But in a town where nearly every corner store and intersection had surveillance, disappearing entirely was damn near impossible. The investigation entered a critical phase. Detectives focused on mapping out Paige Doherty's movements on the morning of March 19th. They requested footage from all surveillance cameras along the route she usually took, from her friend Lauren's house to the bus stop. 2 locations stood out: the Fleming food store, where she typically grabbed breakfast, and the neighboring deli, Delicious Deli, where she had stopped that morning. The breakthrough came after a call to police from Ashi Ahmed, the owner of the Fleming food store. He told them he remembered seeing Paige that morning. He said she'd waved at him but didn't come into the store, which struck him as unusual. He remembered that his security system had a wide-angle view, so he went back and reviewed the footage. And the video, it clearly showed Paige walking down the street and entering the shop right next door, John Letham's Deli. What was strange, though, is that the footage never captured her leaving. Ahmed immediately shared the video with the police. Investigators studied the footage closely and found that at 8:21 a.m., Paige walked into Delicious Deli. For more than an hour after that, no one was seen exiting the shop. Then, at 9:58 a.m., cameras captured John Letham locking up the shop, pulling down the shutters, and leaving in a hurry. He crossed the street to another store, where he bought disinfectant, bleach, and some heavy-duty trash bags. This was confirmed by both surveillance footage and the store clerk, who later noted just how anxious the customer seemed. At 10:03 a.m., the cameras caught John again, returning to the deli with his purchases. Not long after that, he came back out carrying a large black bag, which he then loaded into his car. Holy shit. The footage clearly showed a foot in a white sock sticking out of the bag. Investigators now realized they were witnessing what looked like a clear attempt to dispose of a body. But this was only one part of a disturbing sequence of events caught on tape. Instead of driving away, Letham returned to the store multiple times over the next 2 hours. He went in and out repeatedly. During that time, he tried to clean the space, scrub away any blood, and get rid of the evidence. Cameras captured all of it: his movements, his facial expressions, his gestures. He looked frantic and completely disoriented. At one point, he even changed his clothes and then just casually reopened the deli to serve customers, as if nothing had happened. What the hell? A police unit was dispatched immediately to make the arrest. Within 10 hours of getting that footage, investigators had enough evidence to take him into custody. Letham was arrested and brought in for questioning. At the same time, forensic experts began a really extensive examination of his shop. At first glance, it looked clean. But after moving refrigeration units and display cases, they found traces of blood hidden under the shelves, and tests confirmed that it was Paige Doherty's. Each new piece of evidence further weakened Letham's position. His actions after Paige disappeared were all captured on camera. He didn't just try to conceal the body. He actively cleaned the crime scene, resumed business operations, and served customers. This showed a deliberate effort to destroy evidence, not a panicked reaction made in the heat of the moment, like he would later claim. Alongside the arrest, investigators continued to gather evidence. They inspected John Letham's car and found traces of blood, despite obvious attempts to clean the vehicle thoroughly. Forensics also examined the area where Paige's body had been found and confirmed that Letham's vehicle had been at that location on the day he later admitted to disposing of the body. So by this point, there was no longer any doubt. That surveillance footage had become the absolute key piece of evidence. It showed who last saw Paige, how the suspect behaved, and the step-by-step effort he made to cover his tracks. And the irony is, it wasn't his own cameras, but the cameras from a neighboring store that revealed the whole truth. After his arrest, John Letham initially denied everything. Straight up, he claimed he didn't even know Paige Doherty and insisted that she'd never entered his store. He also maintained that there was no way blood could be found on the premises. But the police already had hard evidence: the security footage, blood samples from the floor and his car, and that unmistakable image of a body in a trash bag. So, faced with this completely overwhelming proof, Letham changed his story and confessed. In his statement, he tried to claim it all happened in a panic. According to him, Paige came into the store, placed an order, and then asked if he was hiring. He said he asked her age, and when she told him she was 15, he said no. He then alleged that Paige threatened to go to the police and accuse him of inappropriate behavior if he didn't give her the job. He claimed that he panicked, that he was terrified he'd be falsely accused, haunted, he said, by his brother's criminal history, and that's when he grabbed a knife. Letham tried to describe the moment as some kind of sudden conflict. He claimed that Paige started yelling at him and that he struck her, in an attempt to make her stop. When he realized she wasn't alive anymore, he said he wrapped her body, hid it in a storage area, and then just went home. There, he hid her body in a shed, changed his clothes, and the very next day took his family on a weekend trip to a place called Balmaha, as if absolutely nothing had happened. 2 days later, he came back and left her body in a brush-covered area by the side of the road. Investigators, of course, went over his version of events very carefully. First off, there was zero support for his claim of blackmail. Paige had no history of aggression or manipulative behavior whatsoever. Her mother, her friends, her coworkers, they all described her as kind, gentle, and respectful. She already had a job at a salon that she loved, so there was just no reason for her to be looking for work somewhere else. Forensics also revealed that the attack wasn't some quick outburst. It involved a prolonged struggle and a huge number of injuries, which completely ruled out the idea of a momentary lapse. There was no evidence of any kind of sexual assault, which, honestly, that just made his motive even harder to understand. He kept maintaining that he had no intent to harm and that he just acted in response to what he saw as a threat. But look, the nature of the attack: 146 sharp force injuries, with many of them targeting her neck and face. That left zero doubt about the level of brutality. Details of the case started to appear in the media. The public reacted with just total disbelief to Letham's explanation. And one thing that drew particular outrage was what he did after the crime, taking his family on a trip, supposedly to clear his mind. At the very same time the community was desperately searching for a missing teenager, he was on a weekend getaway. Knowing full well that her body was hidden in his shed, it's just goddamn. In light of the evidence, Letham was formally charged with the crime. His confession, paired with these far-fetched justifications, failed to earn him any sympathy from investigators or the public. From the very beginning, it was crystal clear. This was not a momentary lapse. This was a deliberate attempt to cover up a horrific offense. And although the authorities never identified a precise motive for the attack, the sheer scale and brutality of it, well, that spoke volumes. As soon as John Letham's name became public, attention quickly turned, not just to him, but to those around him. In particular, people started focusing on his twin brother, George Letham. George's criminal history only became widely known after the details of Paige Doherty's death were revealed, and that's when the questions started coming up. How much of John's behavior might have been influenced by his family dynamics? During his questioning, John himself brought up his brother. He said he panicked because he didn't want to end up like George. He claimed he was afraid of being accused of misconduct and just couldn't bear the stigma that came with it. But again, investigators found zero evidence that Paige had made any threats or tried to manipulate him in any way. Even if you were to accept his explanation as sincere, which is a stretch, it still raised deeper concerns. I mean, why would someone who seemed to live a stable, ordinary life use his brother's past to justify his own horrific choices? Psychological profiles of the two brothers revealed different levels of self-control, but both of them showed tendencies to deflect blame and to distort reality. The key difference really was that John had managed to maintain the outward appearance of a respectable man for a long, long time. So while George had drawn police attention multiple times, the public interest in the Letham family just grew and grew among journalists, bloggers, and the residents of Clydebank. Some people started to suspect that a culture of, hidden hostility might have existed within the family, even if it wasn't obvious from the outside. And while the investigation into Paige's death revealed no direct connection between the brothers in that incident, their shared history painted this picture a backdrop that made John's violent outbursts seem less isolated than it might have seemed otherwise. 7 months after the crime, the court proceedings against John Letham began. By then, investigators had assembled an overwhelming amount of evidence: surveillance footage, forensic results, witness testimony, and of course the defendant's own confession. His legal team didn't dispute the fact that he had taken Paige's life, but they argued that it had been a moment of panic without any intent. Still, the court had to weigh not just the facts, but also the motives, his behavior after the fact, and the way Letham responded to all of it. In the courtroom were Paige's family members, journalists, activists, and just regular residents of Clydebank, all of them trying to come to terms with what had happened. Pamela, Paige's mother, was the first to speak. Oh God. She described how their lives had just been destroyed since Paige disappeared. How she spent nights without sleep, waking up in terror, thinking she'd heard her daughter's voice. She spoke of this daily emptiness, of a pain that absolutely nothing could ease. And maybe most painfully, she described how hard it was to see her other kids struggling to understand why their big sister never came home. Andy, Paige's stepfather, also addressed the court. He spoke about how the tragedy had just broken him from the inside out, how he couldn't even manage his day-to-day life anymore. His testimony was especially emotional when he spoke about their son Andrew, who has some developmental challenges. Andrew just couldn't understand why the sister he used to walk with and watch cartoons with had suddenly just disappeared. According to Andy, the little boy just kept asking when Paige would come home, and the family was forced to keep avoiding a direct answer. His words left the entire courtroom visibly shaken. The judge found John Letham guilty of committing a serious crime with intent. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 27 years. For Paige's family, it was seen as a step toward justice. As her mother said, it wouldn't bring Paige back, but at least it ensured that the person who took her life wouldn't be walking free anytime soon. The court really emphasized the brutality of the crime and Letham's cold-blooded efforts to conceal it, completely dismissing any notion that this was some kind of emotional breakdown or moment of panic. But despite the overwhelming evidence and the public reaction, Letham's defense team filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too harsh. Their claim was based on the fact that Letham had no prior criminal record, that he had a family and a young daughter, and had been seen as a respected member of the community. They insisted the crime wasn't premeditated, and that Letham had shown remorse, and therefore he deserved a reduced sentence. This, as you can imagine, sparked outrage all across Clydebank, especially among Paige's family and friends. Nevertheless, the appeals court reviewed the case and reduced his minimum term from 27 to 23 years. The judge cited a lack of evidence for pre-planning and the fact that Letham had, confessed. The decision triggered a huge backlash from the public. For many, it felt like they were basically rewarding a criminal. Paige's relatives said publicly that they considered the reduction an insult not just to them, but to Paige's memory. They pointed out that Letham's actions after the crime, cleaning the scene, hiding the body, trying to go back to work as if nothing happened, showed no real remorse at all. John Letham himself remained composed throughout the hearings. He never once looked directly at Paige's family or addressed them. His demeanor was just flat, emotionless. It left the impression that he had completely distanced himself from the reality of what he'd done. Observers noted that he showed zero recognition of the damage he'd caused. He never apologized, never expressed sympathy, not to Pamela, not to Andy, not to anyone close to Paige. And that only reinforced the feeling that reducing his sentence was a massive mistake. So, the final ruling left a bitter aftertaste. On the one hand, the man who did this was behind bars. On the other, knowing that he could be released in just over 2 decades. That sparked a lot of discomfort for a lot of people. But the most important outcome was that the crime did receive a formal legal judgment, and Paige's family had the opportunity to speak publicly and share the unbelievable pain they had endured. The court answered the question of who, but the question of why. That remained unanswered. The case impacted everyone who knew Paige. And, believe it or not, authorities had to arrange protection for Letham's wife, Kezia, after she became a target of verbal and physical attacks during prison visits. She was apparently harassed and even assaulted until she finally fled to Poland with her daughter. The Letham family faced public condemnation. John's brother, George, just continued his life of crime, threatening people with weapons, physically assaulting his wife, and the family's darker history really started to surface. Pamela, Paige's mother, started a foundation in her daughter's name to help other families dealing with grief. She later gave birth to a daughter and named her Penny Paige. The grief, of course, never left, but the family tried their best to keep moving forward. Clydebank has not forgotten Paige. Memorial walks were held in her honor. People wore pink, her favorite color, and released balloons into the sky. Her funeral drew a huge crowd, with the casket carried in a horse-drawn carriage. On what would have been her birthday, her friends threw a party for her, the one she never got to attend. In the end, Paige became more than just a victim. She became a symbol, a memory, and a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of senseless cruelty.